Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Idea Knowledge Share series. This is the first in the series for 2026, and we are absolutely delighted to have with us today Bobby McCormack from Development Perspectives. Bobby is a long-standing member of IDEA, as well as currently being the chair of our National Council. And I know Bobby has been involved with Global Citizenship Education and Development Education for over 20 years. He is the CEO of Development Perspectives and also has a very strong role in SAILTA, which is the Irish Aid Strategic Partnership for GCE in adult and community education settings. He has a long bio, which I won't go into further, but I will just go through some housekeeping before then I hand over the mic to Bobby to kick off. We are recording the session today, so if you prefer not to be in the recording, you can keep your video off. I would like to ask everyone to stay on mute while Bobby is presenting, and there will be a question and answer session at the end, and that will not be recorded. So this would enable us to have a freer space to share our thoughts and questions. And if you have any questions while Bobby is sharing, you can put them in the chat and we can address them later. Or if there's anything in relation to the actual webinar, you can put the question in the chat for a staff member to address. Thank you so much. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Bobby. Take it away.
Cheers, Lee. Thank you. And lovely to see so many members of IDEA in the space. Looking forward to chatting to you over the next 45 minutes. I've been involved in GCE, as Lee has said, for a long time and still passionately interested in the area, thankfully. And I'm not here to talk to you an awful lot about, my background or anything like it at all. But I suppose just to say that I really do still think that GCE is crucially important, and it's one dimension of it that I'd like to really talk about today, and that's the local. And you'll see as the slides go on that's really where the focus is. You see that the title of what I'm going to talk about today is very much around connecting to the local, and that's not trying to paper over or ignore the recognition and the importance of the international and the global. But I do think, in my experience, it's a part maybe that's a little bit neglected in GCE, I would say that grassroots local connection. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Can I ask as well, if you don't mind, to encourage you to ask questions as we go? And as Lee rightly said, you can pop those questions into the chat space, or given the fact that there's a small number of us, feel free to raise your hand. Or if I'm babbling on, you want to shout because I can't see your hand, please do. And of course, the guidance for the time that we have this morning is that I'm going to do a little bit of an input, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions and comments and debate and discussion. Maybe not answers. I don't know if I'm going to give lots of answers, but yeah, depending on, of course, the GCE community is great at asking questions, so no doubt you'll ask really tough questions. And before we kick off, I'd like to ask you one, if that's okay. I'd like for you to use the chat space and to really try to put into the chat space, what do you think the biggest local challenge is in your community? And if you could, it doesn't matter what the issue or challenge is, it doesn't have to be GCE related. It's just, what is the biggest issue or challenge facing your community? I see Rory got straight off the mark in their housing. Thank you for that, Rory. Anyone else, feel free to just put them into the chat space, and then we can begin to just browse them together. So Lee concurs, Georgina, thank you, Georgina. Cost of living. Joe, thank you. Housing, racism, hate. So Sinead and Alva have put in possibilities there. And again, just for all of you to browse through what other people are putting in: dereliction, cost of living, discrimination, funding, housing, spaces for young people to socialize, from Sinead. Thank you, Sinead. That's a great one. Yeah, thank you. Lack of empathy. Okay, great. So we've got a real flavor of what's coming up for this group. And the reason that I mentioned that is that I think it's really important when we're doing GCE or DevEd, and I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably today, um, that in order for our work to be relevant, I really do feel that we need to be reaching people in terms of their lived lives as much as possible. And because I think sometimes we can talk in abstract and we can talk in the macro, but I don't always think that remaining in the macro or the abstract is a great way of engaging with people. So what I'm going to try and do, I suppose, is to try and use development perspectives as a case study in terms of how we've tried to address the local. But I've one more question for you, and this is not something I'm going to ask you to populate the chat space with. I would like you to think about it though. How much does your GCE practice address exactly what you've put into the chat space? And again, I'm not looking for responses to that. It's more for you to think about and to accompany our kind of reflections and comments as we go through this morning's session or this afternoon now. Yeah, so how do we cater for exactly what we've put in to the chat space in our day-to-day GCE practice? So it's one to consider as we go through the session. Lee, if you wouldn't mind, if you can go on to the next slide, if that's okay. I did run into some technical difficulties, so Lee is kindly sharing the slides. So there'll be a little bit of to and fro with myself and Lee. I just want to give you an idea of the stages of development in development perspectives. And this is like, it's not linear. I don't want to pretend that everything that happened in development perspectives was so well planned that it all just fell into place. It didn't. This is more chronological in terms of years, but it does give an idea of how and when we focused on the local. So back in 2006, 2008 was when we started the work of developing perspectives. Myself and my current, still co-founder and now wife, Margaret Downey, who's contributed a huge amount to developing perspectives. We focused very much on the international and the piloting phase that took place between 2006 and 2008, we were very carefully working with partners in Sri Lanka, Tanzania, and Liberia. Now that work continues, but it's just to say that our work started there. So our work was initiated in Sri Lanka in 2006. In 2009, the organization was set up. So formally, we began to be our own organization in 2009. And from 2009 to 15, it was very much organizational development, but even though we were based in Drogheda, so we were, if you like, headquartered in Drogheda, first of all, in what was the old Garda barracks in a place called Barlow House in Drogheda, and the tentacles and projects began to grow, we were still very much focusing on the international. So if you were to ask anybody in the Drogheda area back in 2015, could you tell us a little bit about development perspectives? I think if you were lucky enough to find anybody that could tell you anything about development perspectives, then they would have referred to the work that we were doing in Sri Lanka and in Tanzania. And that wasn't our intention. Our intention was to only be working with partners, but with a view to bringing the local and global closer together. But I think we got pigeonholed locally into just doing work overseas, and that began to be something that we were conscious of as we grew as an organization. And from 2015 to 2018, we did, I think, focus more on the strategic and the professional, and that's not always positive. I want to say that, I mean there on the strategic and the professional, it was much more around focus on policies, focus on governance, focus on transparency and accountability. Because before that, we were very much focused on doing small scale, I think, high quality work. But in 2015 and 20, between 2015 and 18, the focus somewhat changed. And then along came, I think, much more of the local focus. In 2018 to 2023, we began to realize that actually it was beginning to be a bit of a weakness, I think, that the local was somewhat missing. And it's not to say it wasn't there, but it wasn't recognized enough by the participants on our programs that actually we wanted people to be very active, not just globally but locally. But what did that look like, and how do we do that? How do we bring GCE to the local context without necessarily referring to it all the time as GCE, because I think the jargon of GCE, of Dev Ed, I think sometimes it's off-putting. It's not really that easy to enter into the world of GCE, I don't think, unless you do it in a way that sometimes parks the language and just gets into the subject matter, which is what we began to do much more. And in 2024, I think we began to be really good at it. So 24, 25, 26, and into the future, I hope we improve our practice. But certainly, I would say in the last couple of years, that local part has become more obvious and higher quality, I think. But throughout all of this, I just want to make sure that you're aware our mission stayed the same. Like, to tackle the root causes of poverty, inequality, and climate change through transformative education and active global citizenship. Our organizational mission has remained, but I suppose how we do that, how we achieve our mission has somewhat changed to embrace the local a little bit more. So Leigh, if you don't mind, and this is familiar to all of you good folk. I'm not going to stay focused on this for any length of time. I've taken the kind of definition that Irish Aid would use around global citizenship education, and I'm pulling out a couple of key things here. One is that the local to global and back to local arguably is omnipresent, I think, in good GCE. I think it's really important that we try to embrace that continuum as much as possible, to connect some of the macro to the micro, to really see things as an ecosystem, to see things in a systems approach and all that goes with that, but to never forget, I think, the root causes. We're really interested, I think, as GCE practitioners, to look at where the issues that you put into the chat space, where do the root causes of those things come from? The cost of living, housing, lack of empathy, where does that come from? And just to emphasize the action component, I would firmly believe that if there's no action in GCE, it's development studies or something else. Still might be valuable, but I don't think it's GCE. I think that action component really helps define what it is we do as a sector. And I think without that action component, especially locally, I think we become slightly hypocritical. If we're talking about active citizenship, but don't really do an awful lot locally, I think we're just, talking the talk, but without walking it at all. And I think that this is where I think we're gaining traction, I think, as an organization, because we're walking the walk. I think we've gone way beyond um just talking about things in an educational sense. And I'll come to some good examples of that. But with that comes risks. And I do want to highlight that. I do think as an organization, we're walking a tightrope. I will refer to one legal challenge that we're currently taking. That puts us, I think, in a difficult position, but I think it's an important position nonetheless. So, Leigh, if you don't mind, if we can move on. So here are just some examples, and I won't keep you long with these examples, but these are the types of things that we began to look at. Some of this might resonate with the list of things that you've had in your biggest issues or challenges facing your local community. Some of this is very specific to Drogheda, and I'll explain why. Some of it's a bit more regional, and we'll talk down through them. I'm not going to go through them all in great detail. There's two of them that I'm going to focus on a little bit more, which we'll come to. So the first thing to say is that migration and inclusion. I live next door to Mosney. Mosney is probably one of the state's biggest centre for housing those who are international protection applicants. We started the work not just in Mosney, but in Drogheda more generally back in 2018. For 3 years, we chaired and facilitated the work of Louth and Meath County Council on the Joint Migrant Integration Forum. And for us, that was a key way of expressing our professional skill set or being facilitators for two local authorities. And I think that was really important work. In March 22, we set up an incubated group called Drogheda Welcomes that was for Ukrainian people who had moved to the northeast of Ireland as a result of the horrible conflict. And But I wanted to emphasize this is that we were not involved in that really group. Now, what we did was we helped set it up with lots of local people. We incubated in terms of space and then we left them to it. So what we felt from a GCE point of view was that we weren't there to do that all the time, but what we were there was to support the establishment of local groups. To scaffold them when they're growing and then arguably to pull out. And on this, I want to highlight the work of Troca and Concern. Both Troca and Concern may not use that language, but that's what, in a way, they did for us. They incubated and supported our work in our early years and continued to support our work, which we're very grateful for. But that support was really needed in the early years. And what we'd like to see ourselves as part of an ecosystem that supports other entities in the Drogheda, Louth, Northeast area. Gangland criminality, Drogheda suffers from huge amounts relatively of gangland criminality, sadly. So what we did was that we got involved around the evidence base for that. So we did these things called community crime impact assessments. They were done with the local Gardaí. And again, the local guards wouldn't have been aware of what we did in development perspectives, but they are now, and we're kind of trusted locally on the evidence gathering end of things, which is interesting. But it's something that we did and did very successfully. The River Boyne, I'll come back to on Save the Boyne and the Boyne Vision. And the next one, then dereliction and vacancy. Drogheda is one of the highest rates of dereliction, building dereliction in the state. And so one of the things that we did was to help establish and incubate Drogheda vacancy and dereliction. And that's a multi-stakeholder group. We only play a part, but we incubate it to the place that it is now, which is it's becoming its own organization. Um, we still host the meetings for Drogheda Vacancy and Dereliction, but Drogheda Vacancy and Dereliction is on its second Festival of Ideas so it's got a 3-day festival later on in September, similar to Festival of Ideas that run in major cities across Europe. And yeah, we're proud of the fact that we've kind of done a lot on this. And it's on this that we've decided to take some legal action against the local authorities. And this is where it gets frustrating and challenging. I mean, are we just in the business in GCE of education, or does the action component compel us to do things at certain times against our allies? And on this one, the local authorities have a responsibility to undertake something called the Joint Local Area Plan. And both in Louth and Meath County Councils, I think they both abdicated that responsibility. And Drogheda found itself in the position that it didn't have a joint local area plan, which it's legally obliged to do so. So ourselves and Drogheda City Status Group and some other local stakeholders decided to engage a well-known solicitor and to challenge that. And yeah, it got to the stage where in the last couple of months, the local authorities got legal advice for the first time and then decided that they would undertake the joint local area plan. And I think it's been a lesson for us in realizing that sometimes you've got to push, you've really got to put yourself in a position that you might be alienating in a small way, but I think it's really needed. If we're going to ask people in our educational practice to take risks and to challenge power, then I think we need to model that. I think we need to put ourselves sometimes in organizations not just being successful financially or in the long term, but that we're here to be effective, right? And that like sometimes that requires us to speak out more often than it's comfortable to do, and that like I at the same time I'm looking to represent DP to get a building from the local authority. So on the one hand, they're having meetings with us that's about getting access to a building, and then on the other hand, they know that there's a solicitor's letter on their desk, and we're one of the co-signatories. But I think that that's crucially important. But it comes at a risk, and I'm very grateful to have the support of the Board of Management and Development Perspectives to really live up to our values. And, I was at the Gene event yesterday, the peer review, and I think sometimes we talk about things like EU values. Really? Like, are these things on paper? Courage, bravery, honesty, human rights, international law, or do we live them? And I think we've got to live them. We have no choice in developed perspectives but to live them, and that means then I think taking sometimes local risks, or indeed more nationally if the organisation is big enough. I won't keep you too long on the energy one, but we do work with EirGrid quite closely under North Connacht community forums, under Kildare Mead community forums, and we work with local communities in those areas to try to navigate the space between renewable energy provision and some of the local resistance that would be beginning to emerge around infrastructure, grid improvements and the like, because we do have some skill set within our teams of facilitators around things like mediation. And I think, again, that's using our skill set as facilitators and trainers and so on. So we want to see renewable energy, but we also want to see the community engaged in discussions around those investments in infrastructure, not to ignore the community's wishes, but rather than to engage and work with communities to bring those maybe kind of questions that they would have back to EirGrid in a way that's not just tick box, that actually EirGrid need to take on board what the local community are raising as issues of concern. So that's that particular slide. I want to just see, though, just before moving on, Leigh, if that's okay, if there's any questions that I'm missing in chat space, or if any of you want to jump in with a question or a comment, please feel free. This is just a continuation of the some of the list of activities that we've done. So like active travel with Drogheda Cycling, we're very proud to be involved with Drogheda Stands with Palestine. We've purposely been involved more at a local level on that because we think it's really important to be involved at a local level, establishing the group, supporting the group. We've established a local community theatre forum group, a community land trust we're developing at the moment, and we're in the process of getting a social enterprise circular economy hub, hopefully set up in the Drogheda area based on a derelict building that's owned by the local authority. So we're looking to lease that on a long-term basis. And if we could go to the next slide, Leigh, if that's okay. These two next slides, I'll circulate the slides after today so you'll have them. But one of them that I want to focus on, and this is, I have no problem in highlighting this a little bit more, the River Boyne and the Boyne Valley. A couple of years ago, Dawn Meats decided that they wanted to put in for planning permission with Meath County Council to put in an infrastructure pipeline of 40,000 litres of waste from an abattoir directly into the Boyne every day. And that's kind of two swimming pools essentially of waste coming from a meat processing plant. And this would have been about half a kilometre from a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It would have been about a half kilometre to a kilometre upstream of where we access drinking water for 70,000 people daily. And Meath County Council gave them the go ahead. So Meath County Council thought it was a good idea, and we didn't. And luckily enough, we and many others kind of formed a consortium. You can check out the website. We went to An Bord Pleanála, we put in official objections, and it was brilliant. We got Pierce Brosnan involved. Can you imagine? 007 involved in GCE. And I mean, you're not going to lose an argument if you've got 007 involved, right? But the issue here was that it was such a lesson in how local government works, how planning works, and I'm not too sure how much GCE actually does that. Like the role of the councillor. Do we understand the role of the councillor? Do we understand the difference between the EPA, the Environment Protection Agency, and the role of the local authorities? And I think we should, as GCE practitioners, know a little bit more about how houses get built and why in certain areas and who benefits, and what landowners really benefit. Is it for the public good? Is there more public needs that need to be addressed? So this was such a key kind of lesson for us in how local development works in terms of housing, in terms of planning, in terms of even how sometimes TDs are sidelined, how you work to get you get kind of letters put to the minister, you get kind of freedom of information requests, you work with An Bord Pleanála, you get legal advice, you look at judicial reviews. I think that this kind of stuff is really important. I don't really see it that much in spaces of GCE. When to put in an objection for planning, when to kind of intervene in terms of TDs, what the TDs can't do, and so on. And then if we go to the next slide, Leigh, just to finish off on the slides, this is where the housing and dereliction comes in. Like, we brought people like Rory Hearn to Drogheda to talk about housing. We brought facilitators from Amacitia and Galway that some of you will know of, wonderful facilitators there, and the Festival of Ideas. So we're really trying to live the practice of GCE locally. And lastly, just to say on this, it's working. We have many more requests now than we ever had before from the local radio, from local TDs, from councillors around getting involved in things that are thematically important in GCE, but they're not getting in touch with us because of GCE. They're getting involved with us because like of I suppose in activism. They're getting involved with us because they know that we're going to speak up and it's going to cause them problems if they don't. So that's the type of local work that we're trying to do.